When can you declare the government as evil? That's the question. Hey, Richard Myers here. Thank you for joining me. No less an Episcopal theologian as Tucker Carlson recently declared that he had come to the conclusion, in fact, within the last few months, that our government is evil. And that was his words, and he did it with his wry sense of humor and his skill in the insult. And and so the question is the government evil, and how should Christians respond to that? Well, I have never been comfortable, once I became informed, with the church, the body of Christ, the bride of Christ, registering with the government and getting a license to operate by the government. Now, whether the government's evil or not, I'm not comfortable with it. Now, once the government has proven itself to be thoroughly evil, that means all of the heads of the various agencies, those in control of weaponry and law enforcement, and the leaders themselves are evil. That means that they're not just misdirected, i.e. having a policy that might hurt people, but they didn't intend to hurt people. The government now, as we've all become to realize, and I am being tongue-in-cheek a little bit, but no less a theologian as Tucker Carlson has declared that the government has evil motives. They want to hurt people, and they want to control. And so things have become more critical now than they were when I was dealing with this question in an actual situation nearly 40 years ago now. So here's my statement on it. The body of Christ should have nothing to do with the government. It shouldn't ask for permission. It should have no relationship with the government whatsoever. The government doesn't approve. It doesn't license it. And so the body of Christ is not to have any relationship with the government, because when you have a relationship with the government, you are by definition subject to the government. You're not in control. They are in control. And so to ask them permission or to seek their permission to function is, in my view, contrary to biblical truth. So how do we get around it? And so I spent a lot of time thinking about this issue because I thought it was very, very important. And this was 30 or 40 years ago now. And so one of the things that we came up with, and I think this is still valid, and what little time I have left, I may not have that much time left. I just want to get it out there for you younger people to scratch your heads over it. When you register with the government as a corporation and then seek to have tax-exempt status from the federal government, you are now completely subjugating yourself to the government and to the government's control. You are now a licensed church by the government, and they can then enforce whatever they want. They can say and do and force you to do anything that they want, and this has been more and more increasingly evident over the last few years. So how do we get around that? Well, here's what I think is a good idea. First of all, it usually relates to our physical facilities where we're gathering. And so what we did, and what I would suggest, is that you separate the body of Christ from the physical facilities. You should never call a building a church. And that's the first rule. We don't go to church, and the building is not a church. It's a meeting place. It's where we gather. And people say, well, it's insignificant. Everybody kind of says that to me. I don't think so. Our words mean something to us. We're the most important hearer of our own words. And we began to have a misunderstanding, we don't understand the nature of the church. So the first thing we do is we separate the facilities from the body of Christ. Now, we brought into existence Fred. And Fred handled all of the buildings. And Fred stood for facilities, Fred, FR. Facilities and resources for educational development. Fred. So Fred then was the owner and the director and the controller of the physical facilities, And Fred maintained his tax-exempt status with the United States government, and they had a relationship with the government because it was property, and there was zoning laws, and there was all manner of things that relate to property, which are, and of course, property taxes. And so the tax-exempt status stayed with the building, and the government could think that's a church all it wants. That's fine. You might have a discussion about whether it's biblical to trick the government. That's a fun discussion to have. So whether it's biblical, of course, Romans 13 would come into play here. But if you form a board of trustees, and then the building keeps its tax-exempt status, but the church itself is separate from the building, and you begin to develop the outworkings or the understanding of that. Again, if you're a commissary, it's kind of tricky, but if you're a caravan, works just fine. And the church, the buildings are important assets. Trust me, I am a guy that believes in those assets because they provide gathering places, they provide centers of activity and communication, and so I'm not denigrating the importance of buildings, and we have some wonderful buildings, and I'm not saying this just we don't just throw those out. We maintain it, but as a separate legal entity. The building then becomes what the government might view as a church, and then you see the church is just meeting there and just utilizing the facilities. Now, you can work this out, and we did to some degree back in the day. Fred was we used to joke, Fred was the protector of us all because Fred had the title to the property. And so facilities and resources for educational development. And we laughed a little bit about that, but we were serious about it. And so this is a way in which the body of Christ can exist without. And you would say, well, we're kind of tricking the government. Again, it's real. The control of the government is real, and the body of Christ is real as an organism and not an organization. And so I have no problem. Now, you can discuss that, and that's why I'm presenting this video. I'm getting out in front of my skis a little bit, you might say, and I might take a fall, but I just want to throw that out there because I think that is more important and perhaps more urgent now than it was 40 years ago, for sure. Thank you for watching, and think these things over.